Okay, hi everyone. This is the first of a series of interviews with successful international trained lawyers and NCA candidates that went through their OCI process last year. And today we have with us Awais Leghari, who recently summered with Miller Thompson and will be articling next year. I'm Yonida Koukio, and I'm the Memberships and Community Engagement Director at ITLNCA Networks. So, Awais.
Thank you so much for having me here. Yeah, pleasure to be here and great seeing you again.
Same here. So we want to ask you a bit about your background before we delve into the OCI process and your experience here. Just tell us a bit about where you come from, where you studied, and what's your background experience.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So unlike what happens in Canada traditionally is that you undergo a bachelor's degree and a JD program. That's how you do your law. I come from Pakistan. And there, right after high school, we just go into law school. So it's a 5-year program, typically called the BA LLB program. I had the opportunity to go to one of the best universities in Pakistan. And I started my program in 2013, completed it by 2018. And around the time I was concluding my program, I felt like there was an interest that I wanted to practice intellectual property because during my law program I had explored a bit of computer science and I wanted a synergy between the two. I thought that maybe Pakistan did not have that room for it yet. I looked around. Canada seemed like a good option, considering the fact that wherever I wanted to pursue this should be a long-term goal. Like it should not be just grab and run. So that's why Canada seemed like the right option. That's how I did it. Yeah.
Okay, so you moved to Canada in?
I came here in 2019, January. I was supposed to be here in August 2018. That's when I got into the Osgood LLM program for Canadian common law. But there are some visa issues that I encountered. It's pretty normal, I guess, but it sort of delayed the whole thing, and I landed here in January 2019. That is also when I started my program.
Yeah, the visa issues are very common, so I feel
Yeah.
you. So you started your program at Osgood in January 2019, and then after you had completed like 2 terms, you applied for the OCIs for the infirm. How did you apply? What was the process?
So yeah, when I came here, I didn't know anything about any firm here. Like I didn't know what Bay Street was or all these all these things was. I think it took me some time to get oriented with how things work, even with the process. Eventually, like what happens, what is an articling, what is in summer, how do these things work, how does recruitment work. I remember hanging out with a few JD students, and they were talking about Monday interviews, Tuesday interviews, and I was like, "What is this?" At that time, I had no idea. But to be honest, like by chance, I came across someone who told me there's a portal called the WeLaw portal, and you sort of make an account there, and it has all the listings for jobs that you can apply to. Before that, I was only relying on the Osgood's career portal that they had. So this is how I sort of indulged in making that account on that WeLaw portal, and that's where I learned, okay, there are a bunch of jobs that I can apply to. Let's learn what these jobs are about. And, just did a bit of digging on the internet, asked a few JD students, and that is how I learned that, okay, maybe I should take a crack at the OCIs, OCI interviews or OCI jobs, summer jobs, basically. And I did that, the only hurdle that I think I encountered was that no one really listed any, preference or inclination to accept NCA candidates. It was more geared towards accepting JD candidates. So I think I still took a crack at it, and worked out.
That's amazing. So exactly what you mentioned. I feel like candidates that are coming from different jurisdictions do not really know the distinction between the summer positions and the articling positions. And for them, based on the law society requirements, they only need to do article. So they either tackle this through their personal network, or when they go to the VA law portal, they see that only a few firms have posted for articling positions, and most firms actually participate in the summer recruitment because they usually hire their summer students for articling. And it's very rare that they need to supplement their articling class by hiring one or two students through VA law portal and going through the same process of like receiving and assessing the applications, which is a lot of work actually. So you assess your options and you realize that your best chances are through an OCI, and basically OCIs are for summer positions. You assess your options and you thought that the summer position is the best. It opens more doors and you have more options for a summer position.
So yeah, just a bit on that. I guess during my first term here, there was a firm that was holding a firm tour. It was a Bay Street firm, and I just signed up for it. Just went to it, and it was a huge gap, from the firms that I was used to seeing in Pakistan and the firm that I saw here, just in how it was structured, just in how it appeared, just the offices and everything. So it was, I think, a jump up, and that really, lit a fire in me that maybe I would really want to work in a firm at Bay Street. That was the goal. Eventually, that is how it started. Um, I remember that just before the summer positions, there was a period where a few firms opened up articling positions on VLaw portal, but I noticed that not many of those firms were from the Bay Street, and I think that was my goal. So I eventually assessed that maybe I would have a better chance, of applying to all those firms should they appear to invite applications in this for the summer program, and they did. And that is, the step I took. I think, I thought that was the best goal for me, or the best route for me. So yeah.
Exactly as you mentioned. I feel like most Bay Street firms usually participate in OCIs for summer positions. And if you want to work on Bay Street, your chances are higher if you apply for a summer position and not for articling. There are a few firms this year and usually every year, but in comparison to the firms that participate for the summer recruit, it's you have many more options if you go through the summer recruit.
100%.
And tell us a bit about how you prepared your application, because that's one of the trickiest parts. And tell us a bit how you used the VA portal, because I'm pretty sure it's designed for Canadian JD students, and you're supposed to like upload your bachelor degree, your JD, and your graduate studies, and that's not necessarily how it works in different jurisdictions. So tell us a bit about how you tackled this.
Yeah, good question. I would have to walk back a bit, refresh my memory on that, but I hope I can, accurately recall it. So as far as preparing applications is concerned, I think one of the things that they required, and especially for the summer positions, I guess the difference between an application for a summer position and an articling position is that articling position requires references. I noticed that the summer position did not. When the articling positions opened up, that is when I started preparing. So, I just made a draft of a cover letter for different firms. I made a resume. And I thought that maybe, okay, I'll just apply it through the articling process, see if something sticks. And if it does, then, maybe that is something that I can, use for the summer position. Nothing stuck there. When I applied, I received no call back. So clearly there was something wrong with my application. It was, I guess, trial and error based method that I used. What I did was eventually this is, something I can take from a book that I'm reading right now. I formed a tribe of mentors. That's the book I'm reading. And it was just like, a few people in the JD program, a few people down at Bay Street who were working at good law firms, and also you. I reached out to all these mentors, and I told them to take a look at my resume, my CV, and things that I could maybe improve on it, things that I could express better. I remember there was also a session that was being held by the South Asian Bar Association on resume and cover letter skills. and I attended that as well, and I think that was helpful, not just to, of course, polish my resume and cover letter, but also to meet people who were working at, good law firms. So I think networking in that way did help. Um, so yeah, it was mostly that, just having as many eyes look upon my resume and cover letter, and constructive eyes, I would say. Uh, Apart from that, I think the vLaw portal, from what I remember, it was there were just a bit of data entry fields that you had to fill, like name and everything. And as far as bachelor's degrees and master's degrees were concerned, I think it was more of the same. You're right; it's designed for Canadian JD students. It's not designed to incorporate or take on students from other backgrounds. But I sort of still stuck my way, or still stuck my information in there as best as I could. I think that is something that any candidate who logs in there would have to figure out for themselves. It's not a it's not a short method of doing that, I guess. So it's not too hard either, I guess. So you'll be able to figure it out, and this is me speaking to any prospective candidate. You'll be able to figure it out. It's not going to be much of a problem, hopefully. And if it is, then I'm sure your organization is quite helpful in this regard. They can help those candidates.
Totally, yes. So how many firms did you apply to?
I think I applied to all big firms, all medium-sized firms, and a few of smaller firms. Maybe around 36 to 40 firms I actually applied to. Yeah. And
did you have a focus like IP, corporate commercial?
Yeah, I did not apply to criminal law firms, I guess.
Yes.
That's a filter I applied only, and maybe personal injury. Those firms I did not look towards. I looked towards mostly firms that had you could say, were made mostly all service firms, or had more departments that they catered to. So that is what I looked at.
Okay, and how many invites did you receive for OCIs?
So I received 6 callbacks. To my surprise, I did not receive any callback from a small firm or a medium firm. All of them were big firms. That was a surprise to me. But yeah, I think that process was also very, very different for me, because I remember your organization was also helping students back then, and I had not signed up. Uh, but what ended up happening was that I mostly applied through Oscar, and I, wrote in my cover letter, please contact this person for an interview, should you wish to call me back. That person was from Oscar. I received only one callback, and that was the first callback initially that I received from Oscar. And I thought, okay, that is it. That is all I have. And then I started hearing things about other people receiving all these callbacks from other firms, but not from Oscar, but from your platform. So I was wondering what's happening. And on one day, I just woke up. I received a call from someone, from some operator who was working for you guys. And they told me that I have a bunch of firms that had called me, and they want to schedule an interview with me. And then they just sort of, repeated all those firms' names, asked me whether I accept or not. And of course, I couldn't refuse. I mean, who would? So that is what I did. And eventually, yeah, that's how I sort of got all those callbacks.
Okay, so you had basically 5 in-person OCIs at the OBA, Ontario Bar Association, and then one virtual one through
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay,
That's correct.
So let's talk about the virtual one. Only. How was that experience?
So virtual one actually happened after my in-person ones.
After?
Yeah, it happened afterwards.
You were more experienced.
I was more experienced. I knew what I wanted to do at that point in time. And I guess one of the concerns with virtual was that, of course, you couldn't read the other person as much as you could do in the in-person interview. If you feel like the other person is is not taking to your answers well, or they appear less interested, then you could just switch the tempo and make a change. But it was harder to, I guess, assess that with the virtual one. However, my strategy was just to go in and have fun. It wasn't to impress, it was just to make them laugh. Uh, and I guess that lightened the mood and it made for a great 17-minute conversation. And yeah, it worked out. They called me back for an infirm. So
That's amazing.
yeah.
What questions did they ask you during the OCI?
So, and here's something that I can, maybe also talk a bit about networking here and how that figures into it. The first question I think anyone asked me was, tell me about yourself. That's the first question that they put in front of you. And if you start thinking about it, it is a loaded question, especially if you only have 17 minutes, because you have to give them room to ask you more questions and learn more about you. So this answer cannot go on for very long, and that makes it harder. You have to time it, you have to sort of trim it, make it concise and everything. So I think one of the things that helped me was networking, that I had done prior to OCIs and everything. It was so on that, like that networking was completely aimless because I was told just network, and that is what I did. I met a bunch of people, bunch of lawyers, in the hope that maybe this is the way to land a job in Canada, or this is the way to make inroads into these big firms. Um, Whoever I met, the first question that they asked me was, "Tell me about yourself." So I had, you could say, hundreds of interviews prior to this asking me the same question. So by that time, I had sort of fine-tuned it. And I had also learned how people downtown speak or talk, because it was a departure from how people network in my country as to how people network in this country. So I think networking in that sense, which is what I realized during my infirms or during the OCIs, was that it was grounds for me to prepare for my interviews and to speak with all these people. So for anyone who's looking to apply for the OCIs and prepare for the interviews eventually, I think you should start networking. It will help you a lot. And yeah, so just as I mentioned, it was mostly they. Another common question was, what made you apply to this firm? But it wasn't asked, in such a straightforward way all the time. It was mostly, sometimes they'll just, disguise it as, we do this, we do that. What makes you interested in this, or something like that. Or they would probably look at your resume and try to map your experience with what they do and ask how your experience or your interest would translate into our firm, something of that sort, I guess, a bit of variation. And they, then they also gave you room to ask questions, towards the end. That is also when you have to be prepared to, ask them good questions and make an impression. For that, what I did was I read up on my interviewers, what they did. For example, if that interviewer was a litigator, I, looked up a case online, Can Lee, and just ask them about a case, that they worked on. Or if it was someone who worked with corporate files, I looked up on their profile and see what corporate work they did, and just made a question about that. So 17 minutes is pretty short. It just flies. Sometimes you don't even remember the conversation you're having. It just goes by so fast. So most of that, I think it's a way of them putting a face on the application. See if you can really speak confidently, if you can really answer your questions sharply, concisely, and just the overall outlook of a candidate. That's what they're looking for.
Yeah, totally. So you should feel the room and see how they want you to reply. Some firms want you to be more confident. Some firms want you to be more relaxed and more honest. So I feel like you should just feel the room. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that for your elevator pitch, so when they ask you, tell us a bit about yourself. And you have prepared this with so many people. what would you recommend to someone who is preparing for their OCIs now? Yes, you mentioned that it should be concise and that it should allow for room for questions, but at the same time, did you use any buzzwords, anything that made you like top of your class, went to the best university? Or what do you think that you included in those 2 or 3 minutes that made them more interested in you and said yes instead of a no?
That's a good question, and honestly, I probably have to think about it. Um, so my approach was to not make it very methodical. You know, my approach was to narrate my experience, make it story-like, and I think that worked for me because people, you know, tend to relate more with stories. Um, so I just made up a story that sounded really good, um, and I wrapped it under 1 minute. Um, I didn't just tell them I did this, I did that, I did that. Well, I sort of made it more personal. I told them why I did this, why I did that, and this is what led me to this. So in a sense, it was more narrative in that way. I think another thing that I did was, as far as buzzwords are concerned, is yeah, I did use some of the things that I thought maybe could impress them. For example, back in back in law school, I had the opportunity to learn from 3 retired Supreme Court justices. So that is something I also just dropped. Just tell them that I had a good experience, that I went to a good place, because of course they wouldn't know, the school in Pakistan. They probably never heard about it. So I just had to prop that up as well. But yeah, I forgot to mention something that is also something that comes up in the OCIs. It's on your resume. It's a little section called hobbies or interests, and that is where they usually start the interview from. It acts as an icebreaker. Um, I think it is a great way to set the tone for the rest of the interview. If you can make somehow like that conversation light and funny, the interview, I think, most of the time goes well. Um, I remember that day I was late I was almost late for my first OCI interview because the TDC, it just, I think, broke down in the middle. It just took me twice the time that I was supposed to take to reach there. So I opened up in every interview. I opened up with the same joke. I really like. Someone told me that TDC means take the car, and I really felt that today. Something of that sort to make the conversation light. And in one of my interviews, I remember we talked for like 10 minutes on Call of Duty because that was one of my interests in, on the resume. So just make it story-like, make it a narrative, and most people will relate to it. You will also be able to put in jokes and, make the conversation light. After all, it's only 17 minutes. You must make sure that they have a good time talking to you.
That's a great approach. And I wanted to go back to what you said about speak to your why you are doing this, why your path explains your passion or your desire. A lot of students use the word passion in their application package, and they fail to convey the why. Like they list the number of things, like where they went to school and where they worked, but no one understands the why behind it. So I feel like your cover letter and your application package should speak to your values, and that all the things that you're mentioning are incidental to those values, just to prove your values. And it's the things
100%.
that you're doing in your elevator pitch. Like speak to why you're doing this, and they will remember you.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
have persuaded them better than if you just said, I was top of my class and I just worked there and I'm amazing. So totally. And also, you, 1 second. So you mentioned about the hobbies. I feel that that's very interesting. Like I've heard so many stories about the hobbies. I've heard about people saying I like to collect worms, and that must have been like half of the conversation because the recruiters were so interested in this. And recently I heard from another successful candidate, and she said, don't list the hobby unless you can speak about it for more than 5 minutes, because they will just dig into it and they will ask you, if you like cooking, they will ask you more about, tell me the recipe to that and tell me details that you, if you don't remember, you may not sound credible, because
100%.
there's like incredible hobbies and sometimes they cannot really follow through. So that's very interesting. And exactly what you said, make them laugh, break the ice, and then everything that follows comes more naturally instead of just a rehearsed speech. Um, okay, then I think we're good with your OCIs. Was there anything that happened during your in-person OCIs that was different? Were you able to read the room, to feel the room better?
I think one of the things that you have to be careful about during the OCIs is that, the way they were structured, sometimes you have to stay there for a bit longer than usual. You can be there even if you have two interviews. Um, your first interview can happen at 10 a.m. and the next one could happen at 12. So that could cause your energy to dip just by, sitting there and everything, or maybe talking to your colleagues for such a long time. And then, once you go back to the interview, you're sort of drained. So I think that's one thing that I was careful about, that I should not let my energy dip for all of these, interviews, because it's only 17 minutes. You have to give your best. And even then, I did feel my energy dipping for my last interview. Uh, so yeah, I think that is one thing that I did not expect initially. I thought that, maybe it will all go smoothly if I let it happen in the way I had planned it. But energy management is very, very crucial. So yeah, we have to keep that in mind.
Totally. So chocolates, Red Bulls, what did work with you?
um, I think okay, yeah, I did have chocolate. One of the firms, I did not plan on, bringing anything, but one of the firms gave chocolates, and they were one of the best chocolates I've had, Oh my God, they were just so good. I think OCI side, that was probably the strongest reason I felt good after interviewing with them. The chocolates were amazing. Yeah. But yeah, you should have those snacks with you, definitely, to keep you hydrated, keep you energized. 100%. Yeah.
Totally. I found the same. Like the energy is definitely an issue because you do want to sound positive and enthusiastic about interviewing with them, and you cannot really do that if you're so tired. And you've said your story 5 million times, and you have to sound like, let me tell you this once more with the same passion.
Yeah. Let me
Exactly.
hydrate myself for a minute.
Totally. Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah. So
So now, when you were interviewing for the OCIs, did you kind of feel which firms are going to extend an in-firm interview, or were you totally surprised by the outcome?
I was, I had a feeling about which firms I would get called back to. Um, Only one firm that I did not, I think it was my own nerves that I really couldn't figure out whether I would get called back to. That was the firm that I was most interested in. Even though the interview went really well, that OCI, that 17 minutes, that went super well. But of course, I guess sometimes your nerves take over, especially with the places that you really, really want for an infirm. So apart from that, I think you could you could judge by the body language of the interviewer and how the conversation went. So, I remember in my last interview, and this is also something you should, like a prospective candidate should take notice of, is that not only you are tired, but the interviewers are also tired at that point. They ask so many people the same questions and probably received a bunch of answers that sound like the same. So that is also something to take notice of. If your interview is later in the day, you really have to step it up. You really have to make it unique. You really have to make it fun. And for my last interview, I felt I couldn't do that. And I could see it on their face that they were just a bit tired. And for those interviews, I think, yeah, I did not get a call back for a good reason. So
Did they ask any behavioral questions? Were there any surprising questions?
behavioral questions. I think for my virtual interview, I think I did encounter behavioral question, but I do not remember what it was exactly, but I do remember that they did put in a behavioral question there.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No problem. Because usually behavioral questions have to do with like time management or like what would you do if like
Yeah,
a client is acting.
but generally, no one did ask me during the OCIs. It was more of a conversation where it was me knowing the other person and them knowing me. And if you go with that mindset, it makes things a lot easier. You know, it just releases the pressure a bit, and it makes it a conversation instead of an interview. So that's important.
Okay, that's interesting to hear because I've heard that other schools kind of teach students to whenever they answer to a question to kind of bring an element of themselves that may not have been pertinent to the specific question, but they did want the interviewer to find out. So even if the question was what you like about our firm, and they can always be like, by the way, I like your IP group, but I worked at the clinic, and although you didn't ask me about that, I will bring this in the conversation and tell you that I've worked and I've done such a great work at the clinic. And so the things that may not be apparent, they just try to think of ways to bring it up and they kind of lead the interview and not necessarily just passively following and answering questions.
But I think you have to be very careful with that, because sometimes I think one of the mistakes that I noticed many students make, or was a mistake to me at least, was that when you're talking about an icebreaker, when you're talking about fun, you're not supposed to bring something that, translates back to your ability to do really well in a firm environment. Maybe all they're trying to do is just, make a joke or have a good time. And sometimes, when you're tailing off an answer by, putting something about yourself, a bit about yourself, it can get annoying, it can get a bit, pompous, I would say. So I think you have to be moderate and you have to temper all that. But you're right, in the sense that, for example, a lot of firms ask you why this firm, just as I told you, like it's a whole variation. You have to be, I guess, more specificity, I guess, really matters here. Some people, I think, if they get asked this question, why do you want to apply to this firm? Um, you could find a lot of general answers. Your answers should not be general. So I remember one of the firms that I applied to, I even looked up their international activity, the opportunities they were looking internationally at. And I think that was something that spoke to their entrepreneurial spirit. And that is what I highlighted, that this firm is looking for this opportunity in a foreign market. That means it has an entrepreneurial outlook. And this ties back to the entrepreneurial spirit that I have in myself. This is how you sort of make that connection. So it has to be somewhat specific in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Make it easier for them.
Totally. I totally agree with this approach and that they're seeing so many students every day and try to be not the fifth person who has replied in the same way because they will be expecting something more and you stand out by having done your research and having tied it back to your experience and why you want to work there. I think these are excellent answers and that's great to share different approaches because what you mentioned about trying not to sound pompous and trying not to always bring it about you and just be in the moment and allow them to maybe take a half a minute break and laugh about something that has nothing to do with the process can make them more relaxed and more attentive to what you have to say next. So totally. And I think that we exhausted all the questions about the OCIs. I want to go into your in-firm experience and how different was that from the OCIs?
I think right off the bat, one of the things that happens with the infirms is the process of getting called back for an infirm. Here I sort of heard back from the ITL network. They told me what interviews I had and didn't have. But for infirms, there's something called a call day. It's I think an LSO stipulated day, where all the firms they're supposed to call the candidates that they're calling back in a certain period of time. And I remember for me it was October 25th or 26th, and the calls begin from 8 a.m. So you have to be up at that time. You don't have to sound groggy. You make sure that you're up. Um, yeah, that's when the calls started happening. Right off the bat, I think one firm broke the code and they called me at 7:59. So they, but apart from that, I think they are all punctual with the times, and they call you. So yeah, that is how it happens. They call you to set up the times for an infirm and the days, and that is where, that confusion that I had previously with JD candidates talking about Monday interviews, Tuesday interviews, that got resolved finally. Someone gave me the answer. That scheduling happens typically on a Monday or a Tuesday.
So they call you on a Friday to schedule your interviews for Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, and then usually Wednesday night they tell you if they're hiring you or not.
So yeah, that is. But I think it was not on Friday that they called me for a scheduling. It was a whole week prior to that. So they gave us some time. I think the infirms were happening on 3rd, 4th, and 5th November, and I think they called us on October 25th or 26th. So there was quite a few days in between to prepare, which is really important, I guess. But yeah, that's what they do. They call you up. They tell you that we have 2-hour slots, because in firms they happen in 2-hour slots at every firm on Mondays and Tuesdays if you're scheduling an interview on Tuesday. So yeah, I got called back from 3 firms out of the 6 that I interviewed within the OCIs. I think it's a good ratio for an NCA candidate, so I was really happy about that. And all 3 were good firms.
I've heard, just to stop for a second, I've heard that once you feel the room and once you interact with the recruiters, you kind of know which firm is your number one. And you try to put the schedule that firm first on Monday morning. So if the first interview happens at 8 a.m., you try to schedule them 8, 10 a.m. And then based on how your experience during the OCIs, what's the second best and then the third best. Did you try to do this or you just went with the flow?
I did try to do that, but for my first preference, I didn't. I tried to put that firm second on the list, not the first. So the firm that I felt like I had a really strong chance at, or I could have a strong chance at, that was the firm I put at 8 a.m. Where I didn't have to do much to make a favorable impression. That is the firm I targeted for 8 a.m. But the firm that I really, really wanted was at 10 a.m. And the reason for that was I wanted to give myself some practice before going and taking my best shot at the firm that I really liked. That was my approach. It didn't work out that way because timing is not completely in my hands. It's also in the firm's hands when they're doling out, whatever, time slots they have for you. So I had 2 firms on Monday and 1 firm on Tuesday. So that is how it eventually worked out for me. And typically, when you do your Monday interviews, you get called back if it goes well on a Tuesday, and for a 1-hour interview. So it's not a 2-hour interview anymore on the next day. It's a 1-hour interview callback. And I think the same goes for a callback on Wednesday if you get that. So that's how it typically works. And infirms are, I think, a whole different beast. Because it's not just an interview, it's the 2-hour interview, it's cocktails, it's dinners, it's lunches, it's breakfast, it's a lot of things. So it's a marathon, to be honest. It really is. If OCI, you could say OCI is a sprint, 17 minutes, just you're done with it. But like the infirms are a marathon.
Totally. So let's go back to, so you mentioned that you had an idea, but because what JD students usually do, or what prepared students usually do, they have a chart and they have a table, and they have already carved out the 2-hour slots, and they have in their mind what's the best firm that they can have at like 8 a.m., 10 a.m., noon, 2 p.m. And then once those firms start calling you, those calls may overlap. So while you're speaking with a firm that may not be first on your list, and that firm says, I want you at 8 a.m., and you tell them, no, I cannot do 8 a.m., I have you for like 4 p.m. And you schedule that firm for like 4 p.m. and then the firms that you really want calls you and they're like, I don't have you at 8 a.m. Let's just put you at 4 p.m. And you're like, no, I cannot do 4 p.m. Can we do 10 a.m.? So basically you have an idea, but it's usually you have to be very flexible because it doesn't really work out.
You're right.
That happened to you where like people call you at the same time and you were trying to like.
It did happen with me. It did happen with me. I mean, like my first like call was at 7:59, and it happened to be the firm that I really wanted to, take a shot at. So I just scheduled them at the right slot. The whole day was open. It was perfect. But the next one, I remember they gave me a slot for 2 p.m. They did not have an earlier slot. So, my whole idea of getting practice before, going into and taking my best shot at the firm that I really wanted, that just went up in smoke right away. And the third call that I received, it was while I was speaking with my second firm. So I called them back right away. And they wanted to put me in on a Monday, but the times that they were giving me were odd hour slots. So
Yes.
that was a problem. For example, if you have a slot from 8 to 10, 10 to 12, but that firm was giving me 9 to 11, 11 and on, so odd slots. And none of the slots that were giving me were, fitting in with my schedule that I already had, even though I didn't like have a lot of firms, to fit in, but it just wasn't fitting in. So that is why we had to push it to Tuesday.
Totally. Yeah, it happens so often. I basically had one interview at 9 a.m. and the other one at 2. So yeah, it's odds. And you were trying to, like, to accommodate, and then I had to push the next one on Tuesday. So I feel you.
Even if you make a chart, that chart matters for nothing. If the firm says, sorry, we can keep you at this time,
But
So
there are students who are very insisting. They're like, I only have you for 8 a.m. And the person on the other line, they're trying to tell you that we don't have availability for 8 a.m. So that's very tricky. And I don't know how they resolve these issues.
okay.
But yes, totally. And then, okay, now you have already scheduled those interviews, and there's a week that during this week, they usually tell you the interviewers. So each firm sends you an email and says you're scheduled to come at like, let's say 9 a.m. and then you're seeing these people. How does it work? Because some firms have panel interviewers, some firms just assign you a host, and then that host takes you to 3 different offices and you meet 3 different people in the 2-hour slot. How did that work with you?
I was in a good position for that, I think. Because my prior networking, I made a few good people. I met a few good people, made friends with them. At these, what happened to be the firms that I was interviewing with. And these were students, these were artisan students, and not mainly associates. But they were able to tell me, once I got the interviewers list, but generally these people were like, and what I should be careful about. So I had some bit of feedback that was pretty accurate, pretty direct, and pretty reliable in that sense that, some of the things that you can't really pick off the internet. But regardless of that, you do have to look up on the internet, and you do have to check what the interviewers' experiences are like, and what they've been doing in their fields. And as far as setting up those interviews once you're there, it's different for every firm. So, for example, some firms, one of the firms that I went with had me interview with 5 partners, and it was, I think it was 20 to 25 minutes, per partner that I interviewed with. And it was one after the other. So I went I had a host who took me up, set me up before the interview, made sure that, I was relaxed and everything. And yeah, that afterwards he took me to all these partners, and for those 20-hour slot interviews, and that is how it generally happened. But with other firms, it was maybe 2 people at the same time, and then 2 people at the same time. So even if I was meeting 5 people, I had 2, like slots of 2, 2 and 1. So this is how it sort of worked.
Okay. Um, I understand that we're close to 1 hour of speaking, and this has been fabulous.
Oh, really? So the time just goes by. You can't
Definitely.
see the time. Yeah.
So I'm not going to ask you about specific questions that they asked you, but I will ask you about how did you schedule like second interviews, like
I think
follow-up?
we should make this a series, you know?
Totally. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah,
OCIs, firms, and then summer and Arctic.
perfect. Perfect. So yeah, sorry. Can you repeat that question again?
So I just wanted to ask you, how did you manage to schedule the follow-up interviews? Because most firms usually invite you for a follow-up.
Follow-ups, yeah. Um, so that I didn't have much of a problem with the follow-up interviews. Fortunately for me, they landed, at the most convenient spots that I, could possibly have. So, I mean, typically how it happens is that once you're done with, your first interview, with the first day of interviews, um, right after maybe 15, 20 minutes, you get a email or a call from your host telling you that they want you for the next day and what time would be the best for you to come on the following day. And you just give them the time. Typically, it should be, I guess normally what people do is that they give the same time that they had earlier for the previous interview. That is what they did, but I couldn't do that. So I gave them the earliest time that I could give them. That was my approach, I guess. It wasn't any different than that. Not too early, so that I could maybe allow for people at the firm to come into the office, and so that gave me a chance that I would be interviewing with better people. So just have to time it that way.
Totally. And then did you have an interview on the last day of the interviews, like on the Wednesday?
I did, and it was slightly different because one of them was a breakfast. Uh, it was a it was a great breakfast, by the way. The great location overlooking the lake and everything. Uh, so yeah, it was a breakfast, and I think with that sort of interview, it's more of a casual interview. And the second interview was over coffee, so we went down, and it wasn't in the firm. We just went down into the path, which is a host of shops that are located underneath, downtown. They have a network, and we just sat and had a casual plus a serious conversation. By that time, I think they're not looking for you to
Sally.
show interest, you sell yourself. Now it's a point where they're selling themselves in a certain way. They're not doing that very directly, but all they want to know at that time is whether you would accept an offer if they were to extend you one, or whether you were at the top of their list. That is all they want to know at that point in time. And you know, I'm of the, I would propose that if you were in a situation where you have a bunch of firms, um, asking you whether you'd like to, come and join them, I would just say, say yes to all of them. And this is controversial, I know. This doesn't sound very honest, but at the end of the day, you're maximizing your chances. And that is what you should be looking out for yourself in this process, and I think that is what you should be doing.
I I have heard different stories about this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard that I don't know if that's true. Also, these are the rumors that people hear during this process, that they are looking for the magic words that come in essence, you saying you're my number one.
Yeah.
And if you don't say that, then the next best thing would be like, if you make me an offer, I'll accept it. So, and after that, I've heard students who said, you're my number one. I think that was very explicit to two different firms, and somehow firms kind of communicate with,
They do.
I
It,
don't know if that's true, and that candidate eventually didn't hear back from none of the firms. So I would be a bit cautious about this. I don't know if it's a rumor. I would just say that it may lead to firms communicating, and because I believe that firms want eventually to say that we had 100% like acceptance rate. So if they offer 23 positions to 23 candidates, they need them to say yes right away. That means that those candidates had that firm top of their list.
so in my case, by the end of the day, I was leaning towards one firm, you know, and it showed, you know, in the interviews that I had with two different firms, you know, it just showed, you know, generally when I spoke with the other firm, when they asked me whether they like they directly asked me the question, um, you know, and they also enticed me with other things. They generally ask, like, you know, they asked me right away, would you like to come here and join us, you know? And that was the firm that I was not leaning towards. So I just didn't explicitly said that you were my number one, which speaks to your point that you should be cautious and careful. I didn't, you know, and it also showed in my body language and the way I answered it. I just said that you're at the top of my consideration. You know, it just makes it a bit more, you know, I guess, keeps them on their toes and keeps you safe in that regard. But with the other firm that I really wanted to go to, I just told them that, you know, if you, hey guys, if you call me, I'm just gonna say yes. You know, it was pretty straightforward. And at that point, the interview also ended. And I couldn't have been more clearer. So yeah, you're right in the sense that um, you should you know be cautious. But at the same time, I feel like if you don't really convey to the firms that you really want to come there, they're not going to extend you an offer because they'll feel that you have someone else, and you take them up because they don't want to, when they're calling you, they don't want to go down that list and, you know, take up candidates that were down on their list. So in that sense, I guess you have to be careful about how you hedge your bets. But you certainly have to make sure that you maximize your chances.
Okay. So I was going to ask you about your summer experience, and if you can just summarize it a bit, because we could have delved, but I feel like we don't have the time. And then after that, I want to ask you about what's your advice for like candidates that are going through the OCIs, like now virtually in February.
Yeah. So my advice would, no, I'd start with summer experience. My summer experience was great. uh, I had my apprehensions about it because I was really looking forward to going in the firm, and it turned out, because of course how the world has, you know, recently just been jolted into a new reality of COVID-19. All of that became virtual, so in a way it became just a bit harder to meet lawyers and to establish a meaningful connection with them. I think you can still do that virtually, but it takes more time, it takes more patience and effort, because, you know, if those lawyers are at home, they have other things that they're also concerned about apart from just the office. So you have to make a bit more of an effort in doing that. And otherwise, I think my firm also really handled it pretty well. They, you know, really structured their summer program in a way that, you know, we were able to get an exposure to all their different groups. They had lectures assigned to us, webinars, you know, and even assignments for us to, you know, just, you know, for feedback learning and everything. So they had that structured as well. And they also really encouraged us to reach out to them should we feel like we're not getting enough work, or, you know, that there's an area of practice of law that we really want to, you know, get an exposure towards, but we're not getting the opportunity. In that way, they were really helpful. And I think everyone at the firm knew that this was a very difficult period in terms of connecting with each other and, you know, making all of it happen very seamlessly. So everyone was really patient, really sweet, really kind, and they were willing to give their time to our queries, to also in terms of, you know, giving us work so that we could, you know, get our hands dirty. So in that sense, I think it really worked out. Personally, what I tried doing was I tried reaching out, emailing, and setting up calls with people at the firm, with different lawyers in different groups, to make sure that I speak with them. You know, that they sort of establish a connection with me, and not only through calls, but through Zoom calls, so that they can also see me and it becomes a bit more personal. So that is what I tried doing, and, you know, and tried to get to work with as many people as I could. Yeah.
That's perfect. And your last question for today. So what's the advice you would give
Yeah.
to current candidates?
I would say that I don't know if all of this process is going to be virtual. It could be virtual, it could be in person, but you definitely have to be prepared for the virtual part. It could be that. Um, and for that, I mean, of course, all of what I've told you right now can apply to the virtual interviews, but at the same time, it will be a bit different. You'd have to get used, acclimatized to, this particular setting. Networking is a lot different now. You can't really, just ask people to meet for coffee. So I think there are platforms online. I think one's called Lunch Club. I don't know if you've heard of it, Yona. But it's a really useful platform where you can, just log in, sign yourself up for it, and you could meet people for virtual coffees all around the world, that are, people that can interest you. And that is one way of getting you started, being comfortable with speaking to people from different backgrounds, telling them your story, and sharpening your answers and sharpening your pitch. And also getting familiar with talking to people and breaking the ice virtually. So in that way, that's one thing that they can do. And the other thing, again, is to form a tribe of mentors. That is the most important thing that I can, like that you can have. I'm really fortunate that I had you to, go over my resume, my cover letter, and I had other people as well, who helped me during the interns, during my OCIs as well, with how I should tailor my answers and everything. You did that as well for me. So thank you for that. I think that is also extremely important. You should have that tribe of mentors with you, and just be just have very goal oriented mindset. You don't know where you want to end up. For me, I made a goal in my mind that I really want to work at a pastry law firm. um you should narrow, you should always narrow your goals down. You should not have, like, I want to have a job. That's not that's a very broad goal. You should narrow it down where you want to have a job, where, I mean, in what time frame do you want to have a job. That would make you work harder, make you work more focused. So I think that is something that you should also keep in mind.
Totally. I feel like all this advice is so important for students, especially mentors. I think that's the most crucial part. You need someone to assess your application package based on Canadian standards, and you don't necessarily know how to do this yourself. So it's so important, especially to ask either people who are working on Bay Street or student recruiters to take a look at your application package, and also successful candidates from previous years, because they may have tips for you as well. So I think that's so important. Well, I don't have any more questions. I feel like we're past an hour. So this has been so interesting, and I feel it's going to be very helpful for students who are going now through the process. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we wish you all the best in your articling next year.
Thank you so much for having me, and as always, it was a great pleasure speaking with you, Yona.
Thank you.